Everyone has had terrible bosses in their career, and unfortunately, some of you are still dealing with that. And I want to give you kind of a survival guide on what are the worst types of bosses and how do you actually deal with them. And let me know if I didn't cover any of the bosses that you have labeled. Let me know how you would describe your boss in the comments below. Let's get started. The first type of bad boss is the micromanager. A micromanager is a boss who's constantly looking over your shoulder, nitpicking every little thing that you do, and frankly doesn't trust you to do your own job, and oftentimes leads to burnout. So how do you identify a micromanaging boss? Typical signs of a micromanager are excessive supervision, inability to delegate, lack of trust, and invasiveness. To deal with a micromanager, it's always important to make sure that you set boundaries and that you find ways to build trust. You never want to flare up, call a micromanager because they're just going to get more insecure and more overbearing the more that you push against them. Instead, you want to schedule regular check-ins where they are aware of what you're going to be presenting to them and how it's going to be presented. And you also want to make it clear to them that you need space to work. And while you enjoy them being part of the process, you also need some space to work on your own. The second type of bad boss is the bully. Some bosses are more naturally authoritarian, and I personally don't love that approach, but some people tend to gravitate toward authoritarian and control in terms of their management style. Think of the boss that says, "I said, so you have to do it the way I said." That kind of thing. Unfortunately, working with a bully can include yelling, belittling, and undermining. So what are the steps in identifying a bully boss? Number 1, do they have intimidating behavior? 2, do they do regular public humiliation? 3, are they often showing favoritism toward one group of people or one employee? 4, is manipulation a tactic that they use? Unlike the micromanaging boss, bully bosses are very confrontational and very head-on in terms of their communication style. You want to make sure that you stand up for yourself when it happens and in public if possible to make sure that you're able to put a hard boundary down when something happens. If you work with a bully boss, you want to make sure that you document actions as best as you can if there's a yelling incident, if there's a belittling incident, if there's an undermining issue, because you might need that for HR later on. The biggest key of dealing with a bully boss is when you start to see any level of signs that we talked about, that you stop it early and make sure that you can communicate this is where this behavior stops. If you can put your foot down and say this is not how this is going to work, then they typically tend to back off. The third type of bad boss is a workaholic. This is the type of boss who's always on, who's always working over the clock, who's always talking about how much they work. A workaholic tends to present themselves as super hardworking, super dedicated, super passionate and motivated, when in reality, they just use work as a means of coping for lack of social skills or investment in personal life. But it can be stressful to work with this person and it can lead to burnout very quickly. So how can you identify a workaholic boss? They're always on the clock. They always have constantly extreme high expectations. They lack a work-life balance because it's all just work. And they prioritize quantity over quality. If you work with a workaholic boss, the easiest way to manage this is to have a conversation with them and just express to them what are your values. I have a family, I like to do these hobbies, I have things outside of work that I do that I enjoy. The more that you can kind of show them the different values that you have as an individual, the more that they can see, okay, this person isn't going to be working as hard as I am, but they can also respect the fact that you have other things going on in your life. And if you can share especially how those priorities line up in your life, that's going to be really helpful as well. The next kind of bad boss is the pushover boss. This type of boss tends to avoid conflict and just does whatever the loudest person in the room tells them to do. They might yield to your demands, executive demands, or they might overpromise that they want to do a lot of things that they know they don't have time for. And they agree to do things even if they're counterproductive or don't make sense. So how do you identify a pushover boss? They avoid conflict, they are undecisive, they lack assertiveness, and they prioritize popularity over productivity. Now, for those of you that might have a micromanager or a bully boss, you might be looking at the pushover and saying, that sounds like a miracle. It's sometimes more frustrating to work with the other extreme where they don't have strong opinions or they can't give you the feedback that you need, because what ends up happening is you have to redo your work 4 or 5 or 6 times because your boss was told by an executive to do it one way, told by someone else to do it another way. If you don't have a boss that has a strong point of view and a strong constitution, it makes it very difficult as you as the employee to figure out what to work on, what are your priorities, and it oftentimes leads to burnout. If you found that you've worked with a pushover boss or you're currently working with a pushover boss, the thing that you want to do is you want to take initiative and you want to have a strong opinion. You want to have a strong opinion about your work. You want to have a strong opinion about how things should be done. And it's okay, especially if you work with a pushover boss, to go above their heads and actually communicate with the people who are giving those assignments directly. So if your boss is getting an assignment from an executive and the executive is saying it needs to be done X, Y, and Z way, your boss pushes it off to you and you're saying, I can't do it that way. Instead of going through your manager, it's okay to go to the executive directly and say, can we work this out? This is how I think it should be done. Here's my opinion about it. This is the next step. And usually the conflict gets resolved very quickly and your boss really doesn't even have to be involved. The next type of bad boss is the credit stealer. This type of boss has a knack for taking your accolades, taking your kudos, taking your congratulations. While they take all the credit for the work that you maybe have done, they also don't give any credit to you as part of this process. So how do you identify a credit stealing boss? 1, they take all the credit. 2, they rarely give recognition. And 3, they lack transparency. If you work for a credit stealing boss, the easiest thing that you can do is to make sure that you document the work that you're doing and try to get ahead of however the reviews are going to go for your work. So if your work is going to be sent to an executive later on, you maybe send it to them directly or you figure out a way to talk to them about it without your boss being part of the conversation. Because what happens is if you follow the normal process of giving your assignment to your boss and then your boss turns it in, it makes it look like your boss is the one who organized it if you're the one who did the work. So if there's a way that you can keep track of the work that you're doing or keep track of the list of the things you are doing and then get that work in front of the people who actually need to see it, it takes the wind out of your boss's sail to say, I worked on this project because you're the one who's submitting it. The last type of bad boss that I have is the chaos agent. Doesn't need much of an explanation. The chaos agent is the type of boss that you have that like every time you walk in, you just get a sense of like, what is going to happen today? It's almost like an anxious kind of feeling every time you come into work. How do you identify a chaos agent? They lack direction, they're unpredictable in their decisions, and they have very inconsistent feedback. The best way to deal with a chaos agent boss is to make sure you have clear communications, make sure you have clear benchmarks for your work, and taking initiative to make sure that you have a structured plan for whatever it is that you're working on. And if any of these bosses are kind of treating you like they want to push you out of your organization, check out this video that I made on quiet firing because they might be trying to get you out of the organization. See you in the next one.